You've been burned out for longer than you care to admit. They told you rest is just a weekend away, that healing comes from bubble baths, vacations, or finally finishing your to-do list. But if that were true, why do you still feel so tired, even after sleeping? Why does your chest feel heavy for no reason? Why does joy feel like something distant, like a memory from another life? Here's the truth. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're emotionally exhausted. And what you need isn't more doing. It's unlearning. It's undoing. It's peace note performance. And Buddhism holds the map. For thousands of years, Buddhist wisdom has healed the tired, the restless, the overwhelmed. Not with fake positivity, not with toxic hustle, but with truth, with stillness, with deep soul-level restoration. Tonight, as you listen to these teachings, something in you will start to let go. The noise will quiet, the pressure will soften, and your nervous system, the one that's been stuck in fight or flight, will finally start to exhale. This isn't just another bedtime audio. This is sacred space, a reset for your heart, a homecoming for your spirit. Are you ready to come back to yourself? Let's begin. You've been holding on longer than you should have, smiling when it hurts, saying, "I'm fine," when your soul feels like it's unraveling, trying to keep up, to be okay, to stay strong even when everything inside you whispers, "Please stop." You didn't notice it at first. The slow drain, a little tired, a little impatient, a little less joy. But over time, it built up, like carrying a backpack of invisible weight every single day. And now, even resting feels like effort. But what if the heaviness you feel isn't a flaw in you but a signal? What if burnout isn't just about doing too much, but about carrying what was never yours to hold in the first place? There's a reason Buddhist teachings begin with the mind. Because healing doesn't start with fixing the outside world. It begins by understanding what blocks your peace from within. Buddhism calls them the 5 hindrances, not sins, not flaws, just obstacles, mental habits that quietly wear you down. They don't scream, they whisper. They convince you to chase, to resist, to avoid, to spin in circles, and to doubt everything, including yourself. And most people don't even notice them, but they're there, tugging at your energy, keeping your nervous system stuck in loops, making you feel like no amount of sleep, silence, or space is ever enough. The first one is sensual desire. It's not just about lust or pleasure, it's about craving. Craving for anything that promises escape. Food, noise, social media, online shopping, even constant productivity. Your body may be still, but your mind keeps reaching, grabbing for the next thing to make the moment feel better. And in that grasping, you lose your center. You tell yourself, just one more scroll, one more snack, one more email, one more win. But the relief never lasts. It fades as quickly as it came, leaving behind a deeper emptiness than before. It's not the craving that's the problem, it's believing the craving will heal you. The Buddha never said desire is evil. He said it's unsatisfying, temporary highs, temporary comfort, but never true peace. Because peace doesn't come from getting more, it comes from needing less. From seeing that the urge to consume is often a distraction from something you don't want to feel. And when you meet the craving with mindfulness, when you pause and breathe instead of grabbing you, start to notice you are not your wanting, you are not your urges. And every time you choose stillness over escape, something in you starts to heal. Then comes ill will, that sharp tension that lives under your chest. It doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it's impatience, irritation, judgment, coldness. That silent clench of the jaw when someone interrupts your peace. It makes you tired, but in a different way, because carrying resentment is like trying to walk through life with clenched fists. You use up all your energy just holding on, and over time, it eats at you. Bitterness doesn't just live in the mind, it shows up in your body. Your shoulders tighten, your gut churns. Your breath gets shallow, you feel wired but also weighed down. You start snapping at people you love, or shutting down altogether. And underneath it all is pain-old, unprocessed hurt, disguised as control. Buddhism doesn't ask you to deny your anger, it asks you to see through it, because anger always has a story. And that story is often, I was hurt, I wasn't seen, I felt powerless. When you meet ill will with compassion, not just toward others, but toward yourself, its grip loosens. You begin to soften, not because you've given up, but because you've chosen freedom over rage. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means not letting it burn your energy from the inside anymore. Then there's sloth, not laziness, not weakness, but the heaviness that makes it hard to get up, even when you want to. The fog that wraps around your mind, the feeling that nothing matters, so why bother? It's one of the least understood forms of burnout, because from the outside people say, just push through. But sloth isn't about effort. It's about depletion. It shows up when your system is overwhelmed, when your mind has been fighting so many battles in silence that it just shuts down. You stop caring. You lose your spark. Even joy feels like too much work. And then the guilt comes, the shame. You tell yourself you're lazy, useless, broken. But what if sloth isn't your enemy but your body's cry for silence? For rest without guilt, for space without stimulation. In Buddhism, sloth is gently met with mindfulness and curiosity. Not force, not pressure, but small awakenings. One breath, one step, one gentle invitation to aliveness. And over time the fog begins to lift, not because you forced yourself out of it, but because you gave yourself permission to rest in it, to listen to what your soul needed instead of pushing it to perform. The fourth hindrance is restlessness, that constant spin, the overthinking, the tight loop of thoughts that won't shut off even when you're exhausted. Your body is tired, but your mind is racing. What if this happens? What if that goes wrong? What if I never get better? Restlessness is the nervous system's response to unsafety. When life feels uncertain, the mind tries to control it with thoughts. It thinks, if I just analyze enough, I'll stay ahead of the pain. But all it does is drain you. Because thinking is not the same as healing, and planning is not the same as peace. Restlessness often hides underneath achievement, multitasking, even perfectionism. You stay busy so you don't have to feel, but deep down you're tired of running. So what helps? Stillness, not forced, but kind. Meditation helps. Not to stop thoughts, but to notice them without grabbing them. To see that thoughts are just weather. They come, they go. And underneath them is a sky that has always been calm. When you stop chasing clarity and sit with what is, restlessness fades. Not all at once, but slowly. Because when you stop resisting the moment, the mind stops fighting it. And in that space, your energy returns. Then there's doubt. Not the thoughtful kind. The kind that paralyzes. That keeps you stuck in a loop of, should I? Shouldn't I? The kind that makes you question your path, your worth, your strength. You start second-guessing everything. You try something, then stop halfway. You make a plan, then rewrite it 100 times. You don't trust yourself anymore. And that breaks something inside. Because when you can't believe in your own voice, the world feels louder, scarier, more overwhelming. Doubt creates internal friction. You spend all your energy debating instead of doing. It doesn't protect you, it drains you. And Buddhism sees this clearly. Doubt isn't solved by more thinking. It's softened through confidence in practice, through remembering, I've survived before. I've healed before. I've figured things out before. Faith not in an outcome, but in the path. Doubt whispers, what if I can't do this? Mindfulness replies, let's just take the next step. And every time you return to presence, you weaken doubt's grip. You don't need all the answers. You just need to stay, to breathe, to trust the small steps. The 5 hindrances aren't punishments. They're just pattern zones that keep you in survival mode. They make your days feel harder than they need to be. They tell you that peace is impossible, that you're not doing enough, that you're falling behind. But when you meet each one with awareness, with patience, with Buddhist wisdom, you take your power back. Not by forcing yourself to be better, but by noticing what's getting in the way of who you already are. Burnout doesn't start with work. It starts with disconnection from your breath, from your truth, from the quiet space inside you that just wants to be held. And that space isn't gone. It's just been covered by craving, by resistance, by fatigue, by noise, by fear. Tonight, you get to return to it, slowly, gently, without judgment. You're not here to fix yourself. You're here to remember yourself. And now that you've seen what's been draining you, we can begin the healing. There is more to learn, more to soften, more to let go. So take a breath. You're doing beautifully. The path is already unfolding beneath your feet. Let's keep walking. You've started to see it now, the quiet ways your mind blocks peace, the craving, the tension, the fatigue, the racing thoughts, the doubts. You've looked them in the eye, felt their grip, and something in you has begun to loosen. You're not as stuck as you thought, but insight is only the first layer. What heals you is how you relate to yourself in the aftermath. Because after all the effort to survive, what you need most now is warmth, not from the world, but from within. A nervous system that's been in fight, flight, or freeze for too long doesn't just need rest. It needs safety, and nothing creates safety in the body like loving kindness. Loving kindness, or metta, is not just a nice feeling. It's not positive thinking. It's a disciplined practice. A rewiring of how you relate to your pain, your body, your past, and the world. It teaches the nervous system what it forgot. That you are not your mistakes, you are not your thoughts, you are not beyond healing. Emotional exhaustion, at its core, comes from fighting life, trying to be better, faster, stronger, calmer, more perfect. It's like swimming against the current. Metta teaches you how to float. Burnout builds from years of harshness. The way you talk to yourself when you're tired, the way you measure your worth through productivity, the pressure to always be useful. These aren't just thoughts, they are nervous system signals. They tell your body over and over, you are only safe if you're achieving. And so, rest feels unsafe. Stillness feels like failure. Self-care feels like guilt. Until you bring in metta. Metta changes the script. It starts with one phrase, repeated silently, may I be happy, may I be safe, may I be at ease. It sounds simple, even silly, but the body listens. Your heart listens, especially if you've never spoken to yourself with kindness before. At first, it may feel empty. Your mind might resist. You'll think, this is stupid, this won't work. That's expected. When you've spent years in self-judgment, kindness feels unfamiliar, but repetition rewires the mind. The phrases act like gentle footsteps, carving new paths in the brain. With time, the messages sink deeper, not because you're forcing it, but because your body starts to believe, maybe I don't have to fight so hard to be worthy. Metta helps heal emotional trauma by replacing the inner critic with an inner caregiver. You don't just observe your pain, you sit with it like a friend. You send warmth to your anxiety, instead of pushing it away. You send love to the tightness in your chest instead of ignoring it. You say, "May I be gentle with this?" and suddenly the tension doesn't need to shout anymore. That small shift-off meeting pain with compassion signals to the nervous system, "You're not in danger, you're allowed to rest now." Chronic stress keeps the body hypervigilant. You're always bracing. Even when nothing is wrong, your system is on edge. That's why exhaustion doesn't always come from doing too much. It comes from never being able to relax fully. Metta lowers the baseline. It teaches the system to feel safe again, not through control, but through unconditional warmth. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of you responsible for recovery. Breath slows. Muscles loosen. Heart rate steadies. But it only happens when the inner dialogue shifts. Metta gives that dialogue new language. What makes metta different from other healing methods is that it doesn't require fixing. You don't have to be free from anxiety to deserve love. You don't have to be healed to send yourself peace. That's the power of unconditional kindness. It's not earned. It's offered, again and again, until the walls come down, until love feels less like a performance and more like a return. This practice doesn't just help when you're meditating. Over time, it becomes how you relate to the world. You begin to speak more gently to others, not because you're trying to be nice, but because your nervous system no longer sees threat in everything. The more metta you offer yourself, the less reactive you become. You find that criticism doesn't sting as much, that rejection doesn't unravel you, that failure doesn't define you. You've created a home inside yourself that no one can take away. Metta isn't passive. It's not about avoiding conflict or pretending things are okay. It's fierce. It means choosing love even when your trauma screams. It means staying soft when your past tells you to shut down. It means sitting with the part of you that's ashamed, not to fix it, but to be with it. And something powerful happens when pain is witnessed without judgment. It starts to let go. Practicing metta daily builds emotional resilience, because the more you return to kindness, the less power your triggers have. You start to notice the moment you begin spiraling, and instead of following the spiral, you pause, you breathe, you offer yourself a silent, "May I feel safe in this moment?" And often, that's enough to shift the course. The storm might still come, but you're no longer pulled under. That's the difference between surviving and healing. Metta also has a profound effect on stored emotion. Emotional burnout isn't just mental, it lives in the body. Muscles hold on to memories. The heart holds on to grief. Metta allows you to meet these stored emotions, not with fear, but with care. You scan your body, you notice where it aches, and you send that spot attention, breath, kindness. No analysis, no story, just presence. And as you keep showing up for these places, something begins to open. What was frozen starts to thaw. What was locked away begins to surface and leave. In clinical research, loving kindness meditation has been shown to increase serotonin, reduce cortisol, improve sleep, and even build empathy pathways in the brain. But more than that, it teaches you how to be human without abandoning yourself. It's not a quick fix, it's not a trick, it's a reorientation of how you live in your own skin. When burnout feels like constant effort, metta gives you permission to rest into who you are, not who you think you should be. It gives the body something it rarely receives, inner approval. And that changes everything, because a system that feels accepted stops fighting itself. It starts to regulate, it starts to repair. It begins to restore balance, not by avoiding stress, but by processing it through the lens of love. This is why metta is medicine. Not metaphorically, literally. It treats the root, not the symptom. It tells the nervous system, you are safe, even in pain. You are worthy, even when tired. You are held, even when healing is slow, and when those messages land, something deep inside exhales. One of the most healing aspects of metta is that it doesn't end with you. Once you've stabilized the practice for yourself, you extend it to a loved one, to a neutral person, even to someone difficult. Not to excuse them, not to approve of their harm, but to free yourself from carrying the weight of resentment. Because metta is not about changing others, it's about not letting your own heart harden. Loving kindness is powerful not because it fixes pain, but because it allows you to meet pain without fear. And that, more than anything, is what heals a burnt-out body. Safety, presence, gentleness. Qualities the world rarely teaches, but that Buddhist practice brings to the center. You don't have to be perfect at metta to benefit. Even practicing for 5 minutes a day begins to create change. The key is consistency. Like water softening stone, each repetition wears down the old patterns. You go from self-criticism to self-acceptance, from panic to calm, from exhaustion to renewal. Not because life stops being hard, but because your relationship with life stops being harsh. Burnout can trick you into thinking you're powerless, that the only way out is to quit everything. But healing doesn't always require escape. Sometimes it just requires a shift in how you meet yourself each day. Metta offers that shift. Not loud, not flashy, but steady, quiet, reliable. And over time, your system starts to learn. I can show up without tension. I can feel without shutting down. I can live without pushing. I can rest even when things aren't perfect. I can be here as I am and still be loved. That's the core of it. Beneath the stress, beneath the burnout, beneath the fear, a quiet voice waiting for you to listen, not demanding, not judging, just offering. A place to rest, a place to breathe, a place to return. So tonight, if the weight still feels heavy, come back to the words. May I be happy, may I be safe, may I be at ease. Say them slowly, say them gently, not to force change, but to allow space. And let that space hold you, because the most powerful medicine is the one that reminds your heart it was never unworthy to begin with, and that is where healing begins. You've begun to offer yourself kindness, not as a reward, but as a way of being. You've felt the shift, the warmth replacing tension, the stillness settling where chaos once lived. But as peace starts to grow, another layer begins to reveal itself. A voice, subtle but persistent. The one that says, "This isn't enough. You should be doing more." That pressure to perform, to prove, to stay ahead. It doesn't vanish with rest or loving kindness. It's built into the very idea of who you think you are. This identity, the overachiever, the fixer, the one who always holds it together, it runs deep. It's not just a set of habits. It's how you've defined yourself. It's how you've survived. For years, maybe decades, you've worn the mask of competence, of being strong, of staying in control, and the world has rewarded you for it. Praise, respect, achievement. But beneath it all, a cost has been growing. The cost of never feeling like enough, the cost of running on empty, the cost of confusing your worth with your output. The truth is, burnout isn't just about overwork. It's about over-identifying with the doing, with the striving, with the idea that your value depends on performance. Buddhism offers a different lens. It doesn't tell you to work harder or fix yourself. It asks something far more radical, to question the self you think you are. At the heart of Buddhist wisdom is the teaching of anatta non-self. Not to say you don't exist, but that who you think you are isn't fixed, that the identity you cling to is not your essence, but a construct. And constructs, by nature, are impermanent. The overachiever isn't who you are. It's just a role, a pattern of thoughts, emotions, behaviors conditioned over time. It arises when certain conditions are present, and it fades when those conditions change. But if you believe it's who you are, you stay locked in its grip. The overachiever identity is clever. It doesn't shout. It whispers in your choices. It's the voice that says yes when you're too tired. The one that takes on extra work to feel important. The one that can't sit still without guilt. It turns productivity into self-worth, success into safety, control into identity. But what happens when you can no longer keep up? When rest becomes necessary, when performance isn't possible, that's when the cracks show. That's when exhaustion becomes existential. Because if you're not achieving, who are you? Anatta answers with clarity. You were never those roles to begin with. The pressure you feel isn't coming from your truth, it's coming from a false attachment. A mistaken view that your value is tied to what you produce. When you see through that illusion, a different kind of freedom becomes possible. You don't have to stop caring. You don't have to abandon your ambitions, but you stop clinging. You stop letting your identity be defined by them. To experience anatta, you start by observing. Watch how your mind narrates your life. Notice how quickly it labels, I'm busy, I'm failing, I'm falling behind, I need to prove myself. Each thought reinforcing the story of the self. But when you really look, those thoughts arise and pass away. They're not solid, they're not facts, they're conditioned events, just like weather. Thoughts, sensations, reactions all coming and going. None of them are you. They happen within you, but they are not you. You are the awareness noticing them. As you practice this, something begins to shift. You stop defending the identity. You stop needing to win every argument, to be seen a certain way, to be productive every hour. You start allowing yourself to be soft, to rest, to be incomplete. And in that space, you discover a deeper truth. Your being is not tied to any of it. You are not your achievements. You are not your resume. You are not your habits. You are not even your pain. You are the open space in which all of it arises and fades. This isn't just philosophical, it's profoundly practical, because when you let go of clinging to the overachiever identity, your nervous system starts to settle. The pressure to always be more dissolves. You begin to work from inspiration, not fear. You start to create because you want to, not because you're trying to earn permission to rest. Even failure feels different. It's no longer proof of your unworthiness. It's just one part of the unfolding process. And with that shift, energy returns. Not the hyperactive energy of stress, but a grounded energy one rooted in truth, not performance. Practicing anatta doesn't mean erasing your personality. It means loosening your grip on it. You can still have preferences, goals, passions, but you hold them lightly. You stop reacting from ego. You begin responding from presence. And this changes how you relate to others too. Because the more tightly you cling to identity, the more defensive you become. You see others as threats, rivals, obstacles. But when identity softens, compassion grows. You recognize your shared humanity. You see that everyone is acting out their own conditioned stories. And instead of judging, you start to listen. In burnout, one of the most painful aspects is isolation, not just from people but from yourself. You lose touch with who you are beneath the roles. Anatta helps you reconnect, not by finding a new label, but by stepping outside the need for labels entirely. You begin to rest in awareness. You learn to trust stillness. You discover that your deepest identity is not a role, it's the awareness that sees through roles. This practice takes time. It takes courage. It takes honesty. Because letting go of identity can feel like death. The death of who you thought you were. But in that death, something beautiful is born. Not a better version of you, a freer version, one that doesn't need to prove anything, one that doesn't need to outrun exhaustion, one that knows peace is not something you earn, it's something you remember. Burnout often reaches its peak when you've been living out of alignment with your inner truth for too long. When the persona you wear no longer fits, but you keep forcing it anyway. Non-self invites you to stop pretending, to let the mask drop, and not to be nothing but to be free from clinging to something you're not. When you release identification, you begin to feel safe in presence again. You start noticing beauty without needing to document it. You enjoy silence without needing to fill it. You relate to others without needing to impress. Life becomes less about proving and more about experiencing. That shift alone can begin to repair years of nervous system strain. There is deep rest in letting go of being someone, because trying to be someone all the time is exhausting, especially when that someone is never allowed to be tired, never allowed to fail, never allowed to just be. When you see that you're not that identity, you make space for all of you, the soft parts, the scared parts, the quiet moments, the imperfect decisions, and you realize none of it makes you less. It just makes you human. Anatta doesn't leave you empty. It leaves you open. Open to life, to truth, to simplicity. Open to acting without over-attaching. Open to caring without clinging. Open to effort without pressure. You don't need to abandon your responsibilities. You just stop using them to define yourself. You shift from, I must do this, or I'm worthless too. This is what I choose, from presence. And that shift transforms how you use your energy. From that space, even discipline feels different. It's not about chasing self-worth, it's about honoring what matters. You work, not because you're afraid of being nothing, but because your values guide you. You rest, not because you've earned it, but because your body needs it. You speak, not to impress, but to connect. Everything becomes simpler, more intentional, less reactive. And in moments of stress, when the identity flares back up, you pause, you breathe, you ask, what am I clinging to right now? And the answer is almost always a story, a self-image, a belief that you need to be more, but you don't. You just need to return to awareness, to breath, to this moment. That's where peace lives. So let it be okay to not know who you are. Let it be okay to not have a title, a plan, a polished version. You don't need to be a perfect self. You just need to be here, with honesty, with openness, with less clinging. And in that softening, the healing deepens. Because when you stop holding so tightly to who you think you're supposed to be, your nervous system finally lets go. And what remains isn't emptiness, it's space. Space to feel, space to rest, space to live. When the need to prove yourself softens, when the identity of always doing starts to dissolve, a new kind of clarity begins to rise. Not dramatic, not loud, just stillness. And in that stillness, something tender appears, awareness of how deeply disconnected you've become from your own body. How long you've ignored the signals, skipped meals, overeaten in stress, numbed emotions with sugar, caffeine, screens, and suddenly there it is. A quiet truth that can't be unseen. Healing doesn't just happen in your thoughts. It happens in your gut, your breath, your choice, especially with food. The body carries the memory of your emotional life, not just trauma, but habits, beliefs, neglect. In Buddhist practice, mindfulness isn't limited to meditation cushions and spiritual texts. It's in how you walk, speak, eat. It's in the relationship you have with your daily rituals, especially the one thing you do several times a day, whether stressed, joyful, grieving, or numb. You eat. Mindful eating is not about diets. It's not about weight. It's not about restrictions or willpower. It's about returning to relationship. Food as presence. Food as care. Food as medicine for a nervous system that's been pushed too far for too long. When you're emotionally exhausted, digestion suffers. The body redirects energy towards survival. Your gut slows down. Inflammation increases. Cortisol, the stress hormone, rises. Blood sugar spikes and crashes. The more out of sync your emotions become, the more dysregulated your system gets. You may feel anxious after meals, bloated even when you eat light, fatigued no matter how healthy your food seems. But what if the issue isn't the food, but how you're relating to it? In Buddhism, mindfulness brings awareness to the entire process of nourishment. Not just what you eat, but how, when, and why. It teaches you to pause before reaching for the next bite. To notice the emotion behind the craving. To feel where hunger lives in the body. Is it in your stomach, or is it tension in your chest, a void in your heart, a need to feel comfort? Food becomes not just sustenance but a mirror. It reflects what you're running from, what you're avoiding, what you're craving emotionally but not expressing. This isn't meant to create guilt. It's meant to awaken choice. When you eat with presence, your body shifts out of fight or flight and into rest and digest. The parasympathetic nervous system turns on. Blood flows to your digestive organs. Nutrients are absorbed more efficiently. Inflammation decreases. Even your immune system strengthens. Mindful eating teaches the body, you are safe now. You can let go of the bracing. You can receive. The process begins with awareness, slowing down. Before eating, take a breath. Feel the weight of the food in your hands. Smell it. Notice your body's state. Are you rushing? Are you distracted? Are you eating out of routine or from true hunger? That one pause can shift your entire physiology. You stop the cycle of unconscious consumption and start a new pattern, being with your body, not against it. The way you chew matters. Chewing slowly signals the brain that digestion is happening. It allows saliva enzymes to begin the process gently. Rushing through meals, swallowing chunks of barely chewed food, burdens the gut and adds stress. Eating too quickly also short-circuits satisfaction. You don't give your body time to register fullness, so you eat more than you need, and afterward feel heavy emotionally and physically. Mindful eating also changes your relationship with taste. When you slow down, food becomes richer, more complex. You notice textures, layers, subtleties. Meals turn into meditations. Each bite becomes a moment of connection, and connection is what restores you when you're burned out. Not just connection to others, but connection to your own body, to your own care, to your own enoughness. In Buddhism, food is seen as sacred not because it's fancy, but because it's life. It sustains the body that allows awakening. Monastics eat in silence. They reflect on the origin of the meal, the people who grew it, cooked it, offered it. This cultivates gratitude, not forced gratitude, but grounded appreciation. You begin to see how many hands brought nourishment to your plate. You feel less alone. You feel supported by life. And when you're emotionally fragile, that recognition matters. It builds strength not through control, but through connection. Mindful eating is also about boundaries. Emotional exhaustion often shows up as collapsing into patterns you don't want, just to soothe discomfort. You might eat late at night, snack to avoid anxiety, drink coffee to push through fatigue. These aren't failures, they're signals. Signals that the deeper need is rest, regulation, comfort. When you meet those needs directly, you stop using food to fill what it cannot. Boundaries become easier. You start asking not, what can I eat, but what would nourish me right now? And sometimes, nourishment means stopping. Not because you're restricting, but because you're full, because you're listening. Stress-related inflammation doesn't only come from what you eat, it comes from how you feel while eating. Guilt, anxiety, shame, they are all inflammatory. They disrupt digestion. They create chemical cascades in your bloodstream. They make your body feel like it's under threat. Even healthy eating becomes unhealthy when it's driven by fear. Mindful eating is different. It's not about perfect choices. It's about a relaxed state. That relaxed state heals. You start to notice patterns. Maybe you crave sugar when you're overwhelmed. Maybe you skip meals when you're anxious. Maybe you graze all day to avoid stillness. These are not random. They are strategies your body has learned to cope. And mindfulness doesn't judge them, it studies them. It brings curiosity instead of shame. And curiosity creates space for change. Regulating adrenal overload begins with stabilizing blood sugar, calming the gut, reducing cortisol. All of these are directly influenced by how and when you eat. Irregular eating spikes stress hormones. Late-night meals disrupt sleep. Overconsumption of stimulants keeps your system in overdrive. But instead of forcing discipline, Buddhist practice brings compassionate structure. Regular mealtimes, balanced portions, gentle awareness, and most importantly, permission. Permission to eat, permission to rest, permission to slow down. Many people eat while scrolling, working, watching TV, or even walking. The body eats, but the mind doesn't register the experience. The nervous system doesn't receive the signal of nourishment. You stay hungry not just for food, but for presence. Mindful eating reunites those two. It tells your body, you are here, and this moment matters. This practice becomes even more important in emotional recovery. When your energy is low, your gut is sensitive. Foods that never used to affect you may now cause bloating, pain, fatigue. Mindfulness helps you observe not reactively, but gently. You begin to notice how different foods make you feel, not based on trends, but based on truth. You learn to trust your body's signals. And the more you trust, the less overwhelmed you feel. That trust is what rebuilds your inner safety. Because a body that's listened to begins to cooperate. It softens, it restores. In Buddhist tradition, the goal is not to suppress desire, but to transform relationship. Eating is no exception. You're not trying to eliminate craving. You're learning to sit with it, feel it, understand it. Sometimes the craving leads to food. Sometimes it leads to tears. Sometimes it leads to breath. Either way, you meet it with awareness. And that awareness is what untangles the old wiring of urgency, of guilt, of mindless habits. There's also healing in simplicity, in slowing down to prepare a meal, in choosing whole foods when possible, in giving thanks, in chewing slowly, in stopping when full. These are small acts, but together, they create a rhythm. And rhythm restores nervous systems. It gives your body something predictable, grounded, reliable. And that, when everything else feels chaotic, is a gift beyond measure. You may notice that when you eat mindfully, your entire day shifts. You make better decisions, you speak more calmly, you feel more stable. That's because nourishment affects neurotransmitters, hormones, energy levels. It affects how you think, how you feel, how you connect. Food isn't just fuel, it's a conversation with your cells. A message of safety or stress. Mindfulness ensures that the message is healing. As this becomes a way of life, you stop fearing food. You stop using it to punish or reward. It stops being a war zone. It becomes sacred again. Not because of what's on the plate, but because of how you show up to it. With presence, with gratitude, with care. And slowly, as the inflammation fades, as digestion improves, as energy returns, you begin to trust your body again. You begin to feel at home in yourself. Not by following rules, but by rebuilding relationship. That is the power of mindful eating. It doesn't just nourish your stomach, it nourishes your life. So the next time you eat, treat it as practice, as prayer, as peace, not perfect, just present. Because every bite you take with awareness is a step toward healing. Not just physically, but emotionally, energetically, spiritually. Healing that doesn't come from effort, but from attention. You're not broken, you're rebuilding, one mindful moment at a time. As you begin to slow down, as your body starts to listen, another kind of tension reveals itself, one that doesn't live in muscles or digestion, but deep in the mind. The kind that wakes you at night with a racing heart. The kind that whispers, "What if?" every time you try to rest. The kind that makes even peace feel unfamiliar. It's the background noise of anxiety, the kind born not just from fear, but from the need for everything to make sense, to be secure, to stay in place. And it's this very need that keeps you exhausted. Beneath the surface of burnout is the craving for control. The belief that life must follow a plan, that outcomes must be predictable, that identity must be stable. You chase routines, expectations, roles. And when life doesn't cooperate, when things shift or fall apart, the structure you clung to cracks. That crack is where anxiety enters, not because things are broken, but because your mind cannot accept change without resistance. Buddhist philosophy offers a way through this, not by fixing or rearranging what's broken, but by seeing that the structure itself was never permanent. The core teaching is shunyata, emptiness. Not emptiness as void or absence, but as openness, as fluidity, as the natural state of all things. Nothing has an independent, fixed essence. Everything depends on causes, conditions, and relationships. Nothing stays the same. Nothing is isolated. And while that may sound unsettling at first, it is the very insight that loosens the grip of anxiety. Anxiety thrives on rigidity, on the belief that things must be a certain way in order for you to feel okay. When that belief is exposed, when you realize that nothing can ever be held in place permanently, not thoughts, not roles, not people, not even your idea of yourself, something unexpected happens. Instead of panic, there's space. Space to breathe, space to let go, space to stop fighting reality. This shift doesn't numb you, it frees you, because when you stop expecting life to behave according to fixed structures, you stop blaming yourself every time things change. You stop panicking when plans fall through. You stop exhausting yourself trying to keep everything stable. You begin to move with life, not against it. Burnout often comes from this subtle resistance, trying to make impermanent things stay permanent. Jobs change, people evolve, bodies age, identities shift. But when your sense of self is attached to these things, every change feels like a threat. You try to hold tighter, you overcommit, you overperform. You suppress uncertainty with busy schedules and high standards. But the uncertainty remains, and your energy drains trying to manage it. Shunyata teaches a different response. It doesn't ask you to abandon life. It asks you to meet life without expecting it to remain fixed. That doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become more responsive, less reactive, more flexible, less controlling. You begin to see that everything you once clung to, your identity, your role, your goals, are not solid. They're temporary forms. They arise and pass, just like thoughts, just like emotions, just like seasons. Understanding this intellectually is one thing. Living it is another. It begins with awareness, with watching how your mind reacts when things shift. Do you tighten when plans change? Do you feel unsafe when something is unclear? Do you find yourself rehearsing the future to avoid discomfort? Each of these habits, is built on the illusion of solidity. Shunyata breaks that illusion not to leave you lost, but to help you return to flow. Anxiety often comes from the mind treating thoughts as facts. But thoughts, like all phenomena, are empty. They have no inherent power. They pass through. They arise due to conditions and dissolve when those conditions fade. When you stop identifying with every thought, every belief, every fear, you give the mind room to rest. You stop defending an imagined version of yourself and start relating to what's here now. Shunyata also applies to emotions. Emotions are not enemies, they are movements. They surge and fade. No emotion stays. But when you cling to identity, I am anxious, I am broken, you freeze the emotion into something solid. And that solidity becomes heavy. You resist it, you suppress it, you judge it. But when you see the emotion as an empty event happening, passing, not defining, you respond with less fear. You say, "This is arising now, but it is not me. It will move." This insight dissolves shame. Shame tells you that your burnout is a personal failure, that your anxiety means something is wrong with you. But when you understand emptiness, you realize that your current state is just the result of countless conditions, not a permanent defect. You begin to treat yourself with more compassion, not as a broken version of some ideal, but as someone meeting changing conditions with awareness. This shift also changes how you relate to others. Often, interpersonal anxiety is rooted in expectations. You expect people to act a certain way, to meet certain needs, to never change. But people are also empty of fixed identity. They shift, evolve, contradict themselves. And when you stop expecting permanence in others, your relationships soften. You stop over-controlling. You stop over-apologizing. You allow people to be dynamic, and in doing so, you release the anxiety of having to manage their reactions. Even your stories about your past begin to loosen. You stop defining yourself by old wounds, old roles, old mistakes. You see that those experiences happened, but they are not you. They were conditioned moments. You can learn from them, hold them gently, and let them be part of a much bigger, unfolding truth. Not a single event can define a being that is constantly changing. This doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it sacred. Because when you stop seeking permanence, you start appreciating the moment. You savor a conversation because you know it won't happen again in the same way. You pause for breath because you no longer assume there will always be time later. You live with more awareness, not because of fear, but because of presence. In Buddhist meditation, emptiness isn't just a concept, it's an experience. As you sit and observe, thoughts become less personal, sensations become less reactive. You begin to experience spaciousness, not the absence of experience, but the absence of clinging. And that space is deeply restorative. It's the opposite of burnout. It's the place where energy is not wasted, defending, grasping, controlling. It's the place where being is enough. You may notice that as you practice this, your nervous system starts to uncoil. The constant need to fix everything fades. You become more comfortable with not knowing. You stop chasing certainty. And in that letting go, you reclaim your strength, not the brittle kind that resists, but the resilient kind that bends without breaking. Even in moments of stress, the insight of emptiness can ground you. You can pause and ask, what story am I clinging to? What fear am I treating as truth? What role am I defending? And as you examine those attachments, they start to dissolve. You're left not with confusion, but with openness. And in that openness, new choices arise. You're no longer reacting from old scripts. You're responding from awareness. Shunyata is not about disconnection. It's about seeing the interconnectedness of all things. You see that your burnout isn't isolated. It's woven from societal pressures, personal history, collective fear, biological rhythms. Nothing exists on its own. And that insight brings humility. It helps you forgive yourself. It helps you let go of blame. And it helps you begin again without the weight of who you think you're supposed to be. Burnout often feels like being stuck in a small, tight room with no exit. Emptiness reveals that the walls were never real. They were made of expectations, assumptions, identities. And when those dissolve, the space opens. You can breathe again. You can move again. You can live again. So let your grip soften. Let your definitions loosen. Let your story rest. The more you empty, the more you discover. Not nothingness, but freedom. Not absence, but peace. Not void, but clarity. There's nothing missing from you. There's just too much holding on. And now, you're learning to let go, to rest in what's here, to meet each moment without armor. And in that meeting, something deeper awakens. Something that was never burned out, never anxious, never rigid. Something that's been waiting quiet, spacious, kind. Letting go has already started to reveal what doesn't need to be carried. You've seen how clinging to certainty, identity, and performance holds your anxiety in place. You've tasted what it's like to soften your grip and allow openness. But there's another layer quieter, older, deeper, one you rarely notice because it's always filled with notifications, with voices, with planning, with opinions. Even healing can become noisy. Even self-awareness can turn into another inner conversation. And this constant stimulation is not neutral. It's draining you, not because the world is loud, but because silence has become rare. Silence isn't the absence of noise, it's the presence of clarity. In Buddhist practice, noble silence is not just about being quiet. It's about choosing to stop all unnecessary speech, both external and internal, so the mind has a chance to reset itself. This kind of silence is not passive, it's restorative. It's structured stillness, designed to release you from the mental overload that modern life normalizes. When you're burned out, your mind doesn't stop because you want it to. It keeps spinning because it has never been trained to pause. Information keeps pouring in long after your system has reached its capacity. You keep listening, talking, replying, consuming. Even in moments that look like rest, your attention is still active, scanning, anticipating, interpreting. Noble silence cuts through all of this, not by removing stimulation completely, but by creating a clear boundary that allows the nervous system to finally stop performing. Mental fatigue builds slowly, not just from overwork, but from the subtle demand to constantly process words, reactions, headlines, background noise. And your brain, like any other part of the body, needs recovery time. When it doesn't get it, your thoughts become cloudy, memory weakens, emotions become reactive. You start to lose patience. You misread signals. You interpret neutral events as threats. The mind gets stuck in loops because it hasn't had time to breathe. Silence is the breath the mind needs. It's the space where overstimulation unwinds. But to access that space, it has to be chosen. In Buddhism, noble silence is practiced with intention. It's not simply avoiding conversation. It's the deliberate pausing of verbal and mental engagement. No small talk, no commentary, no storytelling. Even inner dialogue begins to fade. What's left is presence without response. You hear, but you don't reply. You think, but you don't follow the thought. You notice, but you don't narrate. This opens a completely different state of awareness. When you stop filling silence, your system starts to regulate on its own. Heart rate slows, cortisol lowers. The vagus nerve, responsible for rest and digestion, activates. Decision fatigue decreases because you're no longer constantly generating input. Mental tension, which thrives on constant interpretation, starts to unravel. In this space, clarity returns not as something to reach for, but as something that was waiting beneath the noise. Structured silence is powerful because it removes the need to perform. You're no longer curating your words or managing responses. You're not adjusting your tone or crafting a reply in your head. This creates an immediate release of pressure. Your nervous system, which has been tracking the social environment for cues and threats, gets a break from scanning. You stop over-explaining. You stop reacting. You stop trying to be understood. And in that pause, you begin to understand yourself more clearly. Practicing noble silence doesn't require retreat centers or monasteries. It begins with small, intentional periods where you commit to no speech, no media, no engagement. It can be 1 hour, 1 meal, 1 morning. The key is that it's not just quiet, it's complete. No texting, no writing, no consuming content. It's not about isolation. It's about emptying the channels that constantly demand attention. As you practice, you'll notice discomfort. The silence may feel loud at first. Your mind might try to fill it with planning, reviewing, worrying. This is normal. It's the mind detoxing from overuse. Let the thoughts rise and pass without holding them. Don't try to suppress the noise. Just stop feeding it. Every time you return to the silence, the noise loses its grip. Every time you choose stillness, the fatigue starts to lift. Structured silence also helps regulate emotional intensity. When you're constantly reacting, there's no time to metabolize what you're feeling. Emotions pile up. Irritation masks sadness. Fatigue hides behind anxiety. Silence gives them space to be felt and released without explanation. You don't need to name every feeling. You just need to stop distracting yourself from them. The body knows how to process what's real when it's no longer overloaded. One of the most misunderstood aspects of silence is that it's boring. But that boredom is actually a gateway. Underneath boredom is your nervous system recalibrating to lower stimulation. What you interpret as emptiness is actually balance returning. You're not losing engagement, you're gaining depth. Your senses become sharper. You begin to hear subtle sounds. Feel your breath more fully. Notice the tension leaving your shoulders. Awareness deepens without effort. Noble silence also allows space between stimulus and response. This is essential for burnout recovery. Without space, you react on autopilot. You agree to things you can't handle. You speak without thinking. You scroll endlessly. But when silence becomes part of your rhythm, you create space to choose. That space gives you power. It helps you stop the spiral before it starts. It gives you the moment to pause before saying yes out of guilt or fear. It gives you the clarity to say no without apology. Silence builds trust in yourself. Because when you stop reaching for external input, you start hearing your own inner guidance again. You stop outsourcing clarity. You remember how to listen inward. This strengthens your intuition. You start to know when you're overwhelmed, when you're aligned, when you're pretending. That knowing isn't found in advice or noise, it's found in quiet. The practice also creates boundaries without confrontation. You don't need to argue your way into peace. You simply stop engaging where it drains you. Silence becomes your sanctuary, your protection. You don't need to explain your burnout to everyone. You don't need to justify your exhaustion. You step back, you close your mouth, you rest. And in that rest, healing happens. As your nervous system learns this rhythm, silence becomes less of a discipline and more of a refuge. You begin to look forward to it. It becomes a daily return, a moment to reconnect to what's real. You notice how much you speak without intention, how often you fill space because it feels awkward not to. And in noticing, you become more mindful with your words. You speak only when needed. You pause often. You allow space in conversation. This changes how you communicate. It creates less conflict, more clarity, more calm. In Buddhist monastic life, noble silence is not a punishment, it's protection. It protects the mind from distraction. It protects the speech from harm. It protects the energy from scattering. This protection becomes essential when you're healing from emotional exhaustion. You need time away from noise, time away from performance, time away from fixing. Just space. Just being. You can practice noble silence during mundane activities, eating, walking, sitting. The point isn't what you're doing, but how you're doing it, with presence, with stillness, without commentary. And as the silence deepens, you'll notice the difference between quiet and stillness. Quiet is the absence of noise. Stillness is the absence of resistance. Stillness is where you stop struggling to be somewhere else. You stop resisting the moment. You land. This landing doesn't need to feel profound. Sometimes it's just a single breath where you didn't rush. A moment where you didn't need to respond. A walk where you didn't think about anything. That's the medicine. It doesn't heal you through intensity. It heals you through spaciousness, through subtraction, through stopping. Structured silence doesn't solve all problems, but it gives the mind room to see them differently. Without panic, without urgency, you begin to notice patterns you couldn't see before. You recognize how often you give your attention to what drains you. You learn where your boundaries need reinforcement, and you make choices from alignment, not exhaustion. The more you practice, the more silence begins to move with you. You carry it into your life, into the moments of chaos, into the meetings, the commutes, the tension, not as a withdrawal, but as an anchor, a center, a quiet confidence that doesn't need to speak to know its truth. This kind of silence doesn't isolate you. It reconnects you to your body, to your clarity, to the part of you that's never been burned out, just buried. Beneath all the noise, beneath all the doing, there is a stillness that has never been touched by fatigue. Noble silence is the doorway back to that stillness. So, when the world feels loud again, when your thoughts race, when burnout starts to creep back, remember the silence, not as something you visit once, but as something you return to again and again. A reset, a refuge, a rhythm. Let the world be loud, let your thoughts be wild. You don't have to chase them. You have silence now. You have space. Silence creates space. Space reveals patterns. And when those patterns become visible, the question naturally follows, where did all this begin? The exhaustion, the constant effort, the drive to keep going, even when the body says, stop. You can trace it back through schedules, habits, responsibilities, but deeper than that, it lives in the choices repeated over time, not always conscious, not always recent, but woven into your rhythm like a thread that never breaks. The body holds the tension, the mind holds the story, and underneath both is something even older, karma. Karma means action, not just physical actions, but the energy behind them, the intentions, the tendencies, the inner push that becomes outer behavior. Karma isn't punishment, it's pattern. When an action is repeated with strong intention, it leaves a groove. That groove becomes your default reaction. Give too much? Numb your needs? Avoid boundaries? These aren't random behaviors. They're karmic, groove-shaped by repetition, reinforced by habit, often invisible until you stop. Burnout doesn't appear overnight. It's built over time through energetic imbalance. Giving when you're empty, saying yes when you mean no, silencing your own needs because others seem more important. It feels noble, at first selfless, generous. But generosity without wisdom leads to depletion. In Buddhism, wise action is not just about doing good, it's about sustainability. If your kindness leads to collapse, it's not aligned karma, it's karmic debt. Energetic debt forms when your actions cost more than your system can afford, like withdrawing from a bank account with no deposits. Every time you override your body's signals to meet someone else's expectations, you take out another loan. Every time you betray your boundaries to avoid guilt, you go deeper into deficit. And even though the world may praise you for your selflessness, your body keeps the balance sheet, one that eventually shows up as fatigue, resentment, illness, or emotional shutdown. This cycle is not always conscious. It can be inherited, learned from family, modeled through culture, passed down through beliefs that say worth is tied to usefulness, that love must be earned, that rest must be justified. These are karmic imprints, not destiny, but conditioning. And conditioning can be changed, but only through awareness. Only when you stop performing long enough to see what you're actually repeating. Karma is not just about what you do, it's about what you allow. Letting someone cross your boundaries repeatedly is an action. Ignoring your intuition is an action. Staying silent when your truth wants to be spoken is an action, and each one carries energy, not moral judgment, but momentum. That momentum builds until your life reflects it, until your outer reality starts mirroring the patterns you never paused to examine. Breaking this cycle doesn't begin with effort. It begins with stillness. That's why noble silence comes first. In silence, you see where your energy goes. You notice the urges that drive you to fix, to please, to help without limit. And in that seeing, choice returns. You begin to ask new questions. Who am I doing this for? What am I hoping to receive? What am I avoiding by giving so much? Sometimes the giving is a mask, a way to feel needed, a way to avoid facing emptiness, a way to feel in control. Buddhism doesn't shame these patterns, it reveals them. It teaches that awareness dissolves unconscious karma. Once seen clearly, the action changes. You begin to give from fullness, not deficit. You begin to serve without sacrificing your center. This shift starts with recognition. You track where your energy goes, who drains you, what habits deplete you, where you override your inner no. Then you pause, not to fix, but to feel the toll of decades of unbalanced giving, to feel the grief of not protecting your own needs. That grief is not weakness, it's honesty, and honesty is the first step to freedom. Energetic debt also shows up as identity. You believe you are the helper, the one who holds everything, the strong one. That identity becomes heavy. It doesn't allow you to fall apart. It doesn't allow you to say, I can't do this right now. And so you keep going. You give past the point of health. You smile through burnout. You say yes through tears. But inside, the weight keeps growing, until silence makes space, until stillness lets the weight speak. Buddhist practice invites balance through wise action. That means not just acting from compassion, but from clarity. Compassion without boundaries is not sustainable. Clarity shows you when to step in and when to step back, when to offer and when to rest, when to listen and when to let go. This balance is what dissolves karmic patterns. You stop reacting. You start responding. You don't need to be everything for everyone. You need to be aligned with what your body and heart can carry with integrity. Energetic restoration also means learning to receive. Many people trapped in burnout don't know how to be supported. They're uncomfortable resting. They feel guilt when not doing. That guilt is karmic residue. It can only be cleared by consciously choosing to stop, to receive without debt, to rest without explanation, to let others hold you, not as a transaction, but as a healing act. Restoration doesn't mean becoming passive. It means acting from wisdom. A rested body can give without collapsing. A regulated nervous system can support others without losing itself. But this requires new karmic patterns. You have to create new grooves, saying no without guilt, asking for help without apology, slowing down even when no one else is. One of the most powerful tools in Buddhist tradition for shifting karma is intention. Every action begins with intention. If your intention is rooted in fear, the action carries stress. If your intention is rooted in self-awareness, the action carries peace. Setting intention before acting changes the karmic result. You ask yourself, is this action aligned with truth? Does it honor my body? Am I acting from love or fear of rejection? These questions bring you back to center. You also begin to notice the results of past actions with compassion, not as self-blame, but as understanding. You trace your exhaustion to patterns of pleasing, perfectionism, over-responsibility. You acknowledge the pain they caused, not just for you, but for others. Because overgiving often robs others of their own power. Your karmic healing becomes theirs too. When you step out of old roles, others are forced to meet life differently. That's how cycles change. This is not a call to selfishness. It's a return to right relationship. With yourself, with energy, with time, with truth. Buddhism teaches the middle path, not indulgence, not self-denial, just balance. Karma becomes balanced when actions are rooted in awareness. You give because it feels aligned, not because it buys approval. You stop when your system says stop, not when collapse forces you. You speak truth even if it disappoints someone, because the truth is the cleanest energy there is. Breaking karmic cycles of burnout also means rewriting your internal stories. Stories like, I must always be strong. My needs don't matter. If I rest, I'm lazy. These stories aren't facts. They're conditioned responses, and they can be unlearned. Every time you choose presence over performance, rest over reaction, truth over image, you create new karma, new possibilities, new energy. This work is subtle. It doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. With each small shift, the system rebalances. Fatigue starts to ease. You no longer feel haunted by the past. You begin to trust the body again, trust your timing, trust your enoughness. Not because you're trying, but because you're no longer draining energy on proving, fixing, controlling. And that's where freedom begins. Not in becoming someone new, but in remembering what was always there when you stopped giving it all away. You don't need to keep earning rest. You don't need to justify your needs. You've paid more than enough. Now is the time to stop the cycle. Now is the time to restore. Let the karmic debts dissolve, not through effort, but through awareness. Not through more giving, but through deeper presence. Life doesn't need you exhausted. It needs you clear, whole, honest, alive. Awareness is now unfolding where effort used to live. You're learning that burnout isn't just about doing too much. It's about how and why you give your energy in the first place. When karmic patterns of over-responsibility are exposed and released, something quieter emerges. But even in that stillness, there's another layer that pulls and pushes with every outcome, every emotion, every reaction. It's not just the doing that drains you, it's the emotional ride underneath it. The constant swinging between wanting and fearing. And this is where the 8 worldly winds take hold. In Buddhist teaching, the 8 worldly winds are the shifting forces that influence nearly every choice, reaction, and emotional state. Gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute, pleasure and pain. These pairs seem natural, even unavoidable, but when they take root in the heart, they create cycles of hope and fear that leave you emotionally unstable and deeply exhausted. It begins with gain, the thrill of achieving, of acquiring, of finally having something to show for your effort. Gain creates a high, a rush, but it also creates attachment. You fear losing what you've gained, so you work harder, strive more, protect what you've collected, whether it's success, recognition, or emotional validation. And when gain is your focus, the mind becomes restless. It starts to measure every moment based on what it can add. This chase is endless, because gain never feels final. It only creates more desire, more striving, more anxiety. Then there's loss, inevitable, yet always unwelcome. Loss strips you of what you worked for, what you thought defined you, what you assumed would last. And the emotional energy required to resist loss is immense. You grieve, yes, but often it's not grief alone. It's fear, shame, identity collapse. You internalize loss as failure. You take on guilt that was never yours, and instead of letting go, you hold tighter to whatever is left. This tension eats your energy from the inside out. You become exhausted not just by what you lost, but by the need to hold on. Praise seems harmless. It lifts you up, confirms your effort, validates your value. But the danger of praise is how easily it becomes addictive. You begin to crave it. You align your choices with what will keep the approval coming. You measure your worth by the reaction of others. Praise can trap you in roles that no longer serve you, because stepping out of them might mean losing the applause. And when that happens, you begin to live for others' comfort, not your own truth. Emotional exhaustion builds in this performance, slowly, steadily, until even praise starts to feel hollow. Blame, on the other hand, cuts deep. It turns quickly into self-judgment. You internalize every criticism, even the unfair ones. You overanalyze, over-apologize, over-correct. You try to prove you're not what they said you were. This leads to emotional overwork, the kind that comes from constantly trying to redeem yourself. And the irony is, the more you carry the burden of blame, the more reactive you become. Your energy gets spent on defending, explaining, fixing. Instead of letting others hold their projections, you take them on. And with each act of self-protection, the fatigue grows. Fame doesn't just mean public recognition. It's the desire to be seen, admired, chosen. In small ways or big ones, you seek to be important, to matter, to be noticed. And again, the pursuit itself isn't wrong, but when it becomes a source of identity, your energy gets tied to the spotlight. You become anxious about being forgotten. You say yes to things that burn you out just to stay relevant. You start living as a version of yourself that's more palatable, more impressive, and deep down, you begin to feel fake. The effort to maintain the image becomes unsustainable. Then comes disrepute, the fear of rejection, of not being enough, of being misunderstood, disliked, dismissed. You react to it by shrinking or by performing even harder. You over-explain to avoid being misjudged. You stay silent to avoid disapproval. You begin to distrust your own voice. And when disrepute lands, even unintentionally, it feels like an earthquake. Your emotional foundation shakes because your sense of worth was too dependent on being liked. The fear of disrepute locks you in constant self-monitoring, draining your peace moment by moment. Pleasure pulls like a magnet, a moment of ease, a sense of reward. But it can also become a trap when your nervous system starts depending on it to feel okay. You push yourself harder, telling yourself the next break, the next indulgence will make it all worth it. But when pleasure is used as a bandage, it never satisfies. You become restless between hits of comfort. You crave more, yet feel less. The body feels good temporarily, but the burnout remains. Because pleasure cannot repair what presence has abandoned, and pain the one you work hardest to avoid. Physical, emotional, mental discomfort. You numb it, resist it, judge it. but pain grows when denied. It spreads through tension, through exhaustion, through quiet resentment. When your life becomes shaped around avoiding pain, you lose access to freedom. Your decisions shrink, your options narrow. You settle, you endure, and even when the pain is gone, your body keeps bracing for it. That constant guarding is what creates a baseline of chronic stress. It's not the pain itself, it's the war against it. The 8 worldly winds aren't wrong. They are part of being human. But when they control you, when your emotional balance depends on chasing the positive and avoiding the negative, they become the roots of exhaustion. Your nervous system becomes trapped in a loop of reactivity. One praise and you're up, one critique and you're crushed, one success and you're flying, one failure and you're falling. There is no steady ground, no inner refuge. Buddhist wisdom doesn't teach you to ignore these winds. It teaches you to observe them without being carried away. It teaches you to anchor in what doesn't move. When you see the 8 winds clearly, you stop living for outcomes. You stop tying your energy to how things go. You act from presence, not pressure. You speak truth without waiting for applause. You rest even if no one understands why. You hold space for loss without losing yourself. And most importantly, you stop fighting the natural rhythm of rise and fall. This practice brings balance, emotional neutrality, not coldness, but steadiness. You begin to hold praise and blame the same way, with curiosity, not clinging. You feel gain and loss without defining yourself by either. You stop proving, comparing, fearing. Your energy, once scattered by extremes, returns to center. Burnout recovery requires this stability, because no amount of rest will last if your emotions are still ruled by winds you don't see. You'll rest for a day and get thrown off by one harsh comment. You'll meditate all morning and unravel after one setback. Real peace means not being tossed around. It means finding shelter in your own awareness. The 8 worldly winds are subtle. They sneak into daily thoughts, choices, conversations. They become so familiar you don't question them. But every time you pause to notice their pull, you weaken their grip. Every time you act without chasing reward or fearing rejection, you create new freedom. And that freedom is what repairs the nervous system. Not just rest, but inner safety. Freedom from the winds doesn't mean indifference. It means maturity, wisdom, a kind of internal weatherproofing. Life still moves, feelings still arise, but you're no longer driven by reaction. You respond with clarity, you move with intention, you speak with groundedness. And that groundedness is what protects your energy. Letting go of the winds also means letting go of roles. You stop needing to be the achiever, the fixer, the one who always knows what to say. You let people misunderstand you sometimes. You let yourself be human. You trust that what matters most can't be taken by gain or loss, by fame or failure. It lives deeper than that, in presence, in wisdom, in stillness. So when you feel yourself riding the highs or crashing in the lows, pause, breathe, ask, am I being moved by a wind? And if the answer is yes, that's not a failure, it's a chance to return, to center, to clarity. You don't have to fix it, you just have to see it. Because once seen, the winds start to settle, the mind stops chasing, the body stops bracing, and the exhaustion begins to lift, not because the world has changed, but because you have. When the winds stop tossing you around, something strange happens. Stillness doesn't feel empty, it feels like truth. You see how much of your exhaustion came not from the actual tasks, but from being pulled in every direction emotionally, from trying to manage outcomes, impress others, protect identity. And underneath all of that, a life packed full of roles, obligations, distractions, commitments, choices, goals, full yet somehow never fulfilling. The noise outside mirrors the noise inside. And now comes the most unexpected teaching of all. The path to peace might not be in adding more healing, more tools, more effort, but in letting go. Not slightly, radically. In Buddhism, this is called nekkhamma renunciation. Often misunderstood as deprivation or rejection of the world, it's actually the art of releasing what no longer serves your clarity, not to punish yourself, not to prove anything, but to breathe again, to recover the energy that has been scattered across 1,000 unnecessary tasks, distractions, identities, and ambitions. Burnout thrives in complexity. When everything feels urgent, when your to-do list never ends, when your attention is split between 6 screens and 10 expectations. When your home, your phone, your calendar, your inner dialogue, everything is full. You tell yourself you need to keep up. That slowing down would mean missing out, falling behind, being forgotten. But underneath all of it is a truth your nervous system already knows. This pace is not sustainable. Radical simplification doesn't begin with cleaning out your closet or deleting apps. It begins with a deeper question: what am I holding onto that costs more than it gives? That question cuts through every area of your life. People, projects, habits, thoughts. The act of renunciation is not random, it's wise. It's seeing clearly where energy is leaking, where complexity has turned into suffering, and then letting it go, not in resentment, but in relief. In a hustle culture, this teaching is hard to digest. You're praised for being busy, valued for being productive, encouraged to optimize every moment. Rest becomes another item to schedule. Simplicity gets framed as laziness. And so you keep reaching for more knowledge, more upgrades, more achievements. But none of it lands, because peace can't exist where there is no space. Nekkhamma is not about having less just to say you did. It's about needing less because your joy is no longer dependent on having more. It means stepping off the treadmill entirely, not to collapse, but to finally move on your own terms. It's a return to enough, to being full with what's already here. And when that happens, your system begins to rest, not because you scheduled rest, but because you stopped overloading it. One of the first areas to simplify is your digital world. Hours spent checking, replying, comparing, consuming. Every notification steals a little attention. Every feed scroll stirs emotional energy. These small fragments add up. They interrupt your focus. They stimulate without satisfying. They leave your mind buzzing long after you've put the phone down. Renunciation here doesn't mean deleting everything. It means deciding what input actually nourishes me and letting go of the rest. Mental clutter is harder to see, but just as draining. You carry old conversations in your head, unfinished worries, imaginary arguments, self-judgments on loop. These inner dialogues keep your system engaged even when your body is resting. Letting go here means noticing what loops are active and gently choosing to put them down. You can think about it later, or not at all. You don't have to finish every thought. Silence is not a failure, it's a reset. Physical clutter plays a role too, not because minimalism is a goal in itself, but because your environment reflects your mind. A space full of things you don't use creates friction, visual noise, micro decisions. A simplified space signals safety. It tells your brain, nothing to manage here. It allows your senses to rest. It becomes easier to breathe. Social simplification is one of the most powerful forms of renunciation. There are conversations you keep having out of habit, people you stay connected to out of guilt, roles you maintain out of fear. But every interaction costs energy. When you're burned out, energy is a sacred resource. Simplifying your social world means telling the truth. You're allowed to have boundaries. You're allowed to take space. You're allowed to step away without apology. The people who matter will understand. The rest were never aligned. Even your spiritual or healing journey can become overloaded. More books, more methods, more pressure to fix. But healing doesn't need to be a full-time job. When you trust the simplicity of awareness, of silence, of presence, you stop chasing the next solution. You rest in what's already working. You stop trying to reach enlightenment by over-efforting. You return to the breath, the moment, the space between thoughts. That's enough. Saying no is a form of renunciation. So is stopping. So is resting without productivity. These are radical acts in a culture that trains you to earn your worth through exhaustion. But each time you say no to something you don't need, you say yes to something deeper, your nervous system, your clarity, your peace. Letting go also means surrendering the image of who you thought you had to be. Maybe you've outgrown certain goals, but you still chase them because they're tied to your identity. Maybe the job, the project, the routine that once made sense now feels heavy, but you keep doing it because it's what people expect. Burnout feeds on that dissonance. Renunciation invites honesty. You ask, is this aligned with who I am now? And if it's not, you give yourself permission to release it. Joy is a surprising side effect of renunciation. Because when you stop being pulled in 100 directions, you get to feel what's actually here. A breeze, a conversation, a moment of laughter. You don't need a perfect life to feel good. You just need space to feel it all. And the more space you make, the more joy finds you not in grand gestures, but in small, real moments that were always there, hidden under the clutter. This practice also strengthens resilience. Because you're no longer distracted, no longer chasing the next fix. When life shifts as it always does, you don't collapse. You've simplified to what's essential. You're not holding more than you need. You can adapt. You can breathe. You're not attached to excess, so you don't fall apart when it's gone. Letting go is not a one-time event. It's a way of living, a rhythm. You check in often. What am I holding now that no longer fits? You get comfortable releasing. You trust that when space is created, wisdom fills it. Not because you forced it, but because space is clarity's natural companion. Renunciation also softens comparison. When you're not trying to match everyone else's pace, you stop judging yourself by their lives. You don't need their success to feel valuable. You don't need their validation to feel seen. You come back to your lane, your rhythm, your needs. And that return is a deep, unshakable peace. Burnout tells you to keep pushing. That rest will come later. That one more achievement will finally bring ease. But ease doesn't come from more. It comes from less, from choosing enough, from no longer building your life on the edge of depletion. This doesn't mean withdrawal. It doesn't mean giving up ambition or joy. It means refining. Choosing only what supports your nervous system, your purpose, your health. It means living from center, not from noise. You act from intention, not pressure. You engage from presence, not performance. Simplicity becomes a sanctuary. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't fear empty space. You don't chase stimulation to avoid discomfort. You stay with what is. You allow things to unfold. And in that space, the body heals, the mind softens, the heart rests. You begin to notice that the more you release, the more aligned your life becomes. The right people stay, the meaningful tasks remain, the real priorities rise. Everything else fades not because you forced it, but because you made room for what matters. This is the heart of Nekama. Letting go not to lose, but to return, to clarity, to enoughness, to energy that no longer leaks but flows. This is not escape, this is not avoidance. This is wisdom in action. This is how burnout ends, not with one more breakthrough, but with one honest breath and a willingness to live more lightly. Letting go begins to reshape everything. You've started releasing what doesn't serve your roles, habits, noise, even parts of yourself you once thought were essential. The pressure to keep up has started to quiet. Space has returned. But there's one attachment that's harder to see and even harder to loosen. It's not just what you do, it's who you think you are because of what you do. That hidden bond between identity and effort, between self and output. Even when your calendar is empty, the urge to prove your value still lingers. And that's where burnout hides next, not in the task list, but in the illusion of self. In Buddhist teaching, this illusion is understood through the 5 aggregates form: sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Together, these are called skandhas. They are not things, but processes, layers of experience that give rise to the feeling of I. And it's this sense of a fixed, solid self that keeps you tangled in cycles of stress, striving, and exhaustion. You mistake what arises in experience for who you are. You identify with the contents of your mind, your body, your reactions. And in doing so, you take everything personally, defend things that don't need defending, and carry responsibilities that don't belong to you. The first aggregate is form your physical body, the material world, everything seen, touched, and held. You begin here because it's the most obvious. You mistake the body for the self. You measure your worth by how much your body can produce. You push it past its limits to meet demands. When the body gets tired, you don't listen. You push harder. You see pain as weakness, rest as guilt, appearance as value. And slowly, you start treating your body not as a home, but as a tool. Burnout thrives in this disconnection. It turns your body into a machine and your needs into interruptions. But form is not you. It is a condition, a process, changing every day. It doesn't belong to you. You borrow it for this life. You can care for it, nurture it, but it cannot define you. When you stop identifying with the body as your worth, you start caring for it from love, not control. You begin to listen, to honor its signals, to let it rest without earning that rest. And that shift is healing. The second aggregate is sensation. The feeling tone that arises with every experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. You touch something warm. You feel comfort. You hear sharp words. You feel tension. Sensations come quickly and shape your reactions. Without awareness, you start chasing pleasant sensations and resisting unpleasant ones. This becomes a trap. You eat to feel better, scroll to avoid boredom, work to escape discomfort. You end up reacting to the feeling instead of responding to the moment. Burnout deepens when sensations go unnoticed. You keep overriding discomfort for the sake of performance. You stay in situations that feel wrong because you ignore the subtle signals in your gut, your chest, your breath. Mindfulness of sensation allows you to pause, to notice when your system says no, to stop before collapse. When you see that sensations are just passing experiences, not facts, not commands, you stop living on autopilot. You choose more wisely. You rest when needed. You don't chase or avoid. You allow. The third aggregate is perception, the mind's labeling process. It takes in sensory input and names. This is good. This is bad. This is safe. This is dangerous. Perception creates categories. It tells stories. It forms the background of judgment. When you see someone frown, you may perceive disapproval. When you miss a deadline, you may perceive failure. These labels become automatic. They shape how you respond. But perception is not truth. It is conditioned by your past, by memory, by bias. It filters reality, but it is not reality. In burnout, perception becomes distorted. You begin to interpret neutral situations as threats. You see requests as demands. You hear feedback as criticism. These mental shortcuts are not malicious, they are learned responses, but they use energy. They feed anxiety. They keep your nervous system on alert. When you recognize perception as just one layer knot, as the final word, you create space. Space to ask, is this really what's happening? Or is this what my mind is saying? That space brings calm. It stops the spiral. It restores clarity. The fourth aggregate is mental formations. These are the patterns, thoughts, emotions, impulses that shape your choices. Formations include beliefs, habits, drives, moods. They are not random. They're shaped by past experiences, cultural messages, personal conditioning. You might carry a mental formation that says, I must always be productive, or I'm not allowed to fail. These unspoken programs influence your reactions to stress. They create the inner pressure that pushes you to overextend. Burnout often comes from unconscious mental formations, from believing that worth must be earned, that rest is weakness, that helping others means ignoring yourself. You don't question these thoughts because they feel like truth. But when you start observing them, really seeing them, you realize they are just patterns, not facts, not you. And when you name them, you loosen their grip. You say, there's the thought again, the one that says I have to fix everything. And then you breathe. You don't follow. You don't resist. You just see. That seeing changes everything. The fifth aggregate is consciousness. The bare awareness that experiences everything else, not thoughts or emotions, but the knowing of them. This is the most subtle layer. Consciousness is not a self. It is not separate. It is the light by which all other aggregates are known. But when you mistake consciousness for identity, you cling to experience. You think, I am my awareness. But even that awareness arises due to causes and conditions. It too is a process. Burnout occurs when consciousness becomes entangled in everything it observes. You become the exhaustion, the stress, the identity of the helper, the achiever, the one who keeps it all together. But when you sit in stillness, when you see that awareness is not the same as what it knows, you gain distance. You can witness without becoming. You can feel pain without drowning in it. You can notice fatigue without building an identity around it. These 5 aggregates don't bind you unless you cling to them. They are not problems, they are the structure of experience. But when you mistake them for who you are, you suffer. You try to fix what's always changing. You try to control what's not yours. You defend what doesn't need defending. You burn out from holding what isn't solid. Disentangling identity from work starts here, with seeing that the self you're protecting, the one who must succeed, must be useful, must prove their worth, is built from these aggregates. A process, not a person, a temporary configuration, not a truth. And when you loosen your grip, you stop performing, you start living, you meet each moment freshly, without the pressure of being someone, without the weight of the role, without the fear of being wrong. You begin to engage with your work differently, not as a definition of self, but as an expression of presence. You do what's needed, and then you let go. You no longer tie your value to outcomes. You stop taking things personally. You rest when rest is needed. You walk away when the cost is too high. You allow success without attachment. You face failure without collapse. This freedom is not abstract. It's deeply embodied. It means your breath softens, your mind quiets, your choices become lighter. You're no longer caught in every thought or driven by every impulse. You act, but you're not bound. You respond, but you're not consumed. you remain clear. The aggregates keep shifting. That won't change. Thoughts will come, feelings will rise, bodies will tire, perceptions will label, formations will pull, but consciousness remains, watching, not clinging, and in that space, burnout ends, not by force, but by insight. This is not escape, it's awakening, the end of identity as exhaustion, the beginning of living as freedom. When you stop clinging to the parts you once believed were you, something subtle but life-changing takes shape. The pressure to maintain an identity softens. You begin to notice the space between the roles, the moments that don't need performance. And in that space, clarity grows. But even with this insight, something continues pulling you back into movement, into doing, into achieving, into fixing. It doesn't always come from fear or pressure. Sometimes it feels like survival, sometimes like duty, other times like habit. You think you've let go, but you're back in motion again, and again, and again. This is where we look deeper, not at tasks or expectations, but at the very structure of the cycle itself. Buddhism calls it samsara, not just a concept, but a lived loop of suffering. Not just about rebirth, but the repeated patterns of mind that trap you in struggle. And burnout, when seen through this lens, isn't simply about exhaustion. It's about entrapment. The mind caught in a loop it doesn't know how to exit. Burnout is often mistaken for a modern issue caused by fast-paced life. But it's older than technology, older than the office, older than capitalism. The core of burnout is the same pattern samsara has always described. Doing to become, becoming to feel whole, grasping for meaning, resisting discomfort, and repeating. This cycle continues because of craving. Craving to succeed, to be seen, to feel secure, to avoid pain, to be free of emptiness. But craving always leads back to suffering. Not because desire is wrong, but because it never stays satisfied. When craving is unmet, you keep moving. You try harder. You adjust, optimize, upgrade. You make plans, chase new goals, tweak your habits, but the rest never arrives. The peace always seems slightly out of reach, and when the craving is met, it doesn't last. The joy fades, the satisfaction dissolves. So you set new goals, search again, expect more. And the loop continues not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're caught in the mechanism of becoming. Chronic doing is the fuel of samsara, not activity itself, but the compulsive belief that something needs to happen for you to be okay. You don't just do tasks, you attach your worth to finishing them. You don't just help others, you depend on their approval. You don't just solve problems, you believe the next solution will finally bring ease. And each time you complete something, you feel a moment of relief, followed quickly by the next tension. The pause never lasts. Because it wasn't real peace. It was temporary escape. Escaping samsara doesn't mean leaving the world or abandoning your responsibilities. It means no longer being owned by them. It means acting without becoming entangled, doing without seeking identity through it, living without making your inner peace conditional on outcomes. This is not passive. It's clear. It's powerful. It's where energy stops being drained by reactivity and starts flowing through presence. To see burnout as samsara is to recognize the wheel, the turning that never ends unless you step back. That stepping back starts with awareness. You watch how your day unfolds. You feel the pull to check, to answer, to solve, to prove. You notice the internal push. I must, I should, I need to. And in that noticing, you pause. You ask, what is this moment trying to turn me into? Because every action, every thought, is part of the looper, the exit from it. The exit is not dramatic. It's often silent. It's the breath you take instead of the email you rush to write, the walk you choose instead of one more meeting, the truth you speak instead of performing, the willingness to be nobody for a moment and letting that be enough. These choices are not about stopping life, they are about seeing clearly. When the loop is seen, it loosens. Buddhist teachings describe samsara as not just endless, but exhausting. It's exhausting because it is rooted in misunderstanding. The misunderstanding that doing leads to being, that effort leads to freedom, that becoming leads to peace. And this misunderstanding isn't fixed by more discipline or better routines. It is only undone by insight into the futility of chasing what cannot fulfill. Burnout grows when you believe rest is a reward, not a right. When you see pause as weakness, not wisdom. When the voice inside only values you when you are producing. These are samsaric voices shaped by conditioning, echoed by culture, rarely questioned. But once questioned, they lose power. You begin to ask, if nothing changes today, can I still feel whole? If the answer is no, you are in the loop. If the answer becomes yes, even for one moment, you have tasted freedom. This doesn't mean abandoning your goals or passions. It means no longer binding your sense of self to them. You show up, but you stop clinging. You do your best, but you stop identifying. You rest, not because it's earned, but because it's natural. This shift transforms not just your nervous system, but your entire way of being. It turns your energy from reactive to rooted. The cycle of chronic doing often begins early. From childhood, you learn that value comes from what you achieve, that love is conditional, that stillness is lazy. So you keep moving. You build a life on effort, you climb ladders, you collect praise, you chase purpose. And beneath it all, the fear remains. What if I stop and it all falls apart? This fear is the gate of samsara, and facing it is the beginning of freedom. Freedom starts when you sit in stillness and realize nothing is falling apart. You're still here. You're not disappearing. You're not failing. You're resting. You're noticing. You're remembering that you exist without needing to perform. This realization isn't intellectual, it's felt in the body. The unclenching, the sigh, the release. That moment is outside the loop. That's where healing happens. The Buddha taught that samsara continues through ignoranceanot, seeing the nature of experience clearly. Burnout too continues through a kind of blindness. You keep repeating behaviors without seeing their cost. You keep running toward ideals without noticing the damage. But when the light of awareness touches those patterns, they shift. Not because you force them, but because they no longer make sense. You start to live differently. Not because